I finally came up with the missing piece or link to put Hindman back on the map. Now, for people, your readers who aren't familiar with the history of Hindman, Hindman is an icon of musical instrument construction. Thanks to the Hindman Settlement School, back in the early part of the 1900s, they, like us, needed a product they could manufacture or sell that their students could make for income to maintain their day-to-day expenses. So there was, at the time, a pretty big debate amongst the New England missionaries who started the Hindman Settlement School, bless their heart, and the locals who, you know, Appalachians like to sing and dance and have a good time. As I'm sure people from New England do too, but these ladies came down, very conservative approach, very much wanting to keep the traditional values in place, not change people's values, just educate them in the 3 R's. So there was this debate about whether to revive the Dulcimer, which had almost gone extinct at the time, as a primary instrument, because there was a gentleman over there named Uncle Ed Thomas, who was a local legend who would travel around on horseback playing his dulcimer, and he would actually make these instruments and sell them for like $5 or for a meal. No one knows where he learned it from. There's a legend about some mysterious person on horseback who came from the north, or maybe from Pennsylvania or the Amish country, who came down into the hills of eastern Kentucky as a missionary during that great awakening movement of that period. And he had this instrument he would play after they had dinner, and people were fascinated with it. And one person said, "Do you care if I copy that, you know, or make draw a trace of that?" And he graciously agreed. And from that, I guess you would say, oral tradition of passing information, of just sharing ideas and concepts, not actually giving the product a copy, but just saying it's okay if you make one of these. Somewhere or another, Ed Thomas, in the 1890s, around in there, started making these instruments. And it was very popular in Hindman because he lived over there, and he would play for these missionaries and for the teachers who came down in the summers to try to build a school. And when they finally developed the Hindman Settlement School around 1910, it was decided they needed this product, and of course there was people saying, well, let's do the Dulcimer. And then there was even a bigger segment said, no, let's make the banjo our instrument, because banjo's fun and you dance and you sing. But the conservative element of the school decided that they didn't want that image of the mountain person drinking moonshine and dancing and having fun like that. So they went with the more traditional Dulcimer, which is fine, because there was a man there named Jethro Hamburgy who became their primary woodworker. He was one of their first students, and he made over 1,000 of these instruments. And when you read a book about the history of the Appalachian Dulcimer, there's actually a chapter called the Hindman Story. And so Mr. Hamburgy, you know, became this great icon of musical instrument construction in Appalachia. And there was a fellow named Josiah Combs, who was a Hindman Settlement School student, who was very bright, exceptionally bright young man, noticeably so because he always carried a book around with him, and they'd say, well, what you got there, Josiah? And he'd say, history book, you know. So anyway, Josiah went to World War I in France and survived the trench warfare, came back to Knott County, and decided that, I want to go back to France. Imagine that, after serving in World War I in the trenches, but he still wanted to go back to France. Here's this young mountain man, makes his way all the way back to France, marries a French woman, becomes fluent in French, and actually gets a PhD from the Sorbonne. Quite the intellectual. Comes back, becomes one of the top language specialists in the United States, and he always packed his Dulcimer around with him. And they'd say, well, what do you got there, Josiah? He'd say, well, it's an Appalachian Dulcimer. And people would commonly say, well, can you play it? And Josiah is credited with the famous quote, I wouldn't pack her if I couldn't pick her. So he's a great icon of the Dulcimer in eastern Kentucky, along with Jethro Hamburgy. And then there was a great gentleman named Albert Stewart, who is a well-known poet and writer, and a colleague and a contemporary of James Steele, who wrote River of Earth. These great Knockcountians, or I should say Eastern Kentuckians, who perpetuated the concept of folk art. I was fortunate enough to study under Albert Stewart. He was my mentor when I first got out of Berea College, and I taught at Alice Lloyd. And Albert Stewart and his apprentice, Charlie Whitaker, accepted me into their family of musical instrument lutherie club, if you will. And I learned to make the Appalachian Dulcimer back in the 70s, and I have continued my lutherie goals. I've made several dulcimers. Yeah, lutherie is the art of making musical instruments. L-U-T-H-E-R-Y. Now, the reason I'm telling you all this background information is because my goal as executive director of the Appalachian Artisan Center is to continue this great tradition that was started back by Hindman Settlement School in 1910 through 1940 by reviving Hindman as the center of musical instrument construction in Appalachia, not just Eastern Kentucky.